Welcome to Week in One. I'm Rohua Madzena. So, you had a busy week and missed out on the news? Well, we'll bring you up to speed with a quick wrap of the top news stories and interviews on eNCA that have had South Africans glued to their screens. Let's take a look at this week's top stories. Chaos erupts in Kagiso in the West Rand following the gang rape of 8 women. Violent protests in Tembisa in the East Rand. And the ANC Policy Conference draws to a close. The brutal gang rape of 8 women in Krugerstop has sent shockwaves across the country. The women were part of a team filming a music video near a disused mine dump. eNCA's Nqobile Madlala compiled this report after visiting the area.
Civil society is demanding swift action and punishing those involved in Krugerstop gang rape. Unions like the General Industry Workers Union of SA says mining communities must be made part of this economy to mitigate the dangerous underworld of illegal mining. Organizations against gender-based violence say the focus needs to be on helping the women whose lives will never be the same.
It is shocking, it is appalling that in the eve of Women's Month, we are faced with such an ordeal. I mean, we're talking 8 young souls. We're talking between the ages of 18 and 35 years old.
We need to look into all these mines. We need to look at these dumping areas. Who are running these dumping areas? Who are the bosses in those dumping areas?
Our policing needs to be stringent. It needs to be venomous as quickly as possible so that communities can feel safe again.
We do think that is a crime that must be dealt with very harshly. We think that there must be arrest, there must be prosecution, and people that are involved in that must be, sentenced heavily.
Police Minister Bheki Cele says investigators have collected strong evidence.
We have requested our laboratories to fast-track the DNA evidence that was collected so that we are able to link is exactly what we want to do. Collecting these 84, how many, whatever 80 men is not helping us.
In the wake of the attack, police swarmed in the area and arrested over 8 people on variety of charges. They are expected to appear in Krugerstop Magistrate Court on Monday. Nqobile Madlala, Alexandra.
A few days later, police ramped up operations in the area and arrested more than 130 suspects. Those arrested are believed to be illegal miners in Randfontein, colloquially referred to as Zamazamas. We caught up with Police Minister Bheki Cele and Gauteng Police Commissioner Elias Mawela while they were doing a sting operation. eNCA senior reporter Aviwe Mdila was on the ground.
Dozens of gold-bearing material stolen from mines around the West Rand processed illegally at Sibanye Stillwater. This as operations have been successfully arresting at least 42 suspects with 32 cell phones that have been confiscated. Just to get more on this, I am joined by Colonel Davis from the Serious Organized Crime at the Hawks. Thank you for joining us at eNCA, but maybe tell us more on these operations, sir.
Yes, what happens here is that they mostly use young boys that they maybe with human trafficking they bring to these operations to do their work for them. What happens is that they steal this gold-bearing material from different mines in the West Rand area. They bring it here, and why they bring it here is because of the water at the back. They use this to wash down the gold-bearing material on James tables, and then they eventually make amalgam with mercury, and then burn that and get gold nuggets, which makes its way into the illicit market.
Okay, thank you very much. Police Minister Bheki Cele says these operations have been heightened at the backdrop of that heinous gang rape that happened a few days ago in Krugerstop.
We are collecting more cellulars, a quite big number of cell phones. Some of them will be taken, download, and find out who are the real owners. But with this all sweeping that we are doing, definitely the perpetrators will be found. But we need to go beyond those that caused that and make sure that we stop even the future crime being committed by these people who are illegal. Quite a big number of them are foreign nationals, especially Mozambique.
Live ammunition cartridges that are being held by the police commissioner as they continue with their operations, which they suspect those cartridges are from the illegal miners here. 2 more have been arrested, in fact, adding on to that 42 that have been arrested in the course of the day as the Provincial Commissioner General Mawela vows to continue shutting down these illegal mine operations and trying to get to the bottom of who committed that heinous crime of the gang rape that was reported earlier on in the week. Avi Wemtila, West Rand.
But it didn't end there. Smoldering tensions between Kagiso residents in the West Rand and alleged Zamazamas erupted on Thursday. Angry residents mobilized themselves in their thousands and began searching for illegal miners themselves. eNCA senior reporter Avi Wemtila broke the story as it unfolded.
Our pilot takes us now inside these shacks here, where these community members are. It looks like from where we are situated, they're trying to root out the illegal miners as they're literally going inside every inch of Kagiso and trying to take out whatever zamazamas they have. As you can see, there's another dozen, or well, more than a dozen or so there on the ground, also moving around, as we've literally seen the police come in some 2 or so minutes ago. They're now converging in this spot here inside the shacks of Kagiso, as we're going to try then trek back as we hover above the shacks, trying to track back then to the bushes. Earlier on, we saw concerning scenes, colleague, of about a dozen naked zamazamas, we'd assume, that were being marched through the bushes there. And they were being beaten by shamboks, knobkiris, with at least 100 or so members from the community of Kagiso marching with them. We saw them being beaten by the community members as they were being marched to this very place. They're now lying flat on their stomachs on the ground. They're not sure what is going to happen to them, as of course we're seeing from this distance for years now. They've been terrorized by zamazamas who have gone beyond the illegality of mining illegally here, and they've gone to terrorize the community themselves. So they said that they've had enough, and for the majority of the morning, they've been out on the streets in their hundreds, colleague. Different pockets that we've seen literally march around here. Now we've seen them circulating these at least 12 zamazamas, with one that was left behind unconsciously. The situation from a bird's eye view, as we are giving you right from Kagiso in the West Rand area, as the community say they've had enough of being terrorized by illegal miners.
Stay tuned to Week in One. Coming up, we feature some of the big interviews and discussions conducted by our anchors. Welcome back to Week in One. I'm Aropwa Madzena. In response to rising gender-based violence in the country, Professor J.J. Tabane hosted a panel discussion that looked at some of the core issues at the heart of the pandemic.
Dr. Linda just come in there to say, is this a bridge too far? I mean, trying to reshape men now. I mean, we're talking now about 10,000 rapes in 3 months. It's a situation that's out of control. How can we claw back by focusing on the boy child? Because some of those boys are already learning those habits.
JJ, thank you for hosting a show today that's focusing really on the role of raising a different generation of boys as being the real axe that will kill the root of the tree of gender-based violence. So, as Martin has already said, we've got a situation where the way in which we are raising boy children is leading to very toxic, very dangerous behaviors. And if we can turn the tide around and start from the time when they're young at school, playing primary school sport, to encourage good sportsmanship, to encourage being able to accept failure without resorting to their fists. If we can get them out of that cycle that sees them being exposed and being victims of violence by the time they're in their adolescent years, we can certainly start to have a generation of boys that address things differently, that will not use strength to show dominance to win an argument, but will realize that violence in all its forms, not just gender-based violence, but in all its forms, is not the solution.
How do we strike the balance between dealing with a boy child to make them grow up to be men and dealing with a current man?
I'm very, very intrigued by that question, because even the boys themselves are finding themselves in environments where they are becoming perpetrators. The only difference is that they're just not getting caught. So you find yourself in a position where you're saying, do we focus solely on men or on boys themselves? The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And if we really exert all our efforts as NGOs, NPOs, and other community-based organizations to make sure that we curb this pandemic that you speak of, it then requires us to go back to the home. It requires to go back to the school. And of course, most importantly, requires us to go back to those communities.
One of the key talking points during this past weekend's ANC Policy Conference was the issue of renewal and the step-aside rule. eNCA anchors Thulasizwe Simelane and Sally Baudet spoke with Public Enterprises Minister and ANC NEC member Pravin Gordhan about some of the burning issues.
Are we here sitting, analyzing, paralysis by analysis, discussing and hatching policies that are likely to be policies championed by the opposition party, being the ANC in 2024? None of this matters. Many people would say none of this matters. These are policies that Cyril Ramaphosa, if he's the president of the ANC by that time, will be championing from the opposition benches, or whoever is elected in December will be championing from the opposition benches.
You know, to us, there's a big difference between a dream and a delusion. So we don't dream about sitting on the opposition benches. This conference is about renewal. It's about putting the ANC back on the right track. It's about ensuring that we tackle the tough issues, be they issues around the Zondo Commission, around corruption, around rectifying the political culture within the ANC, and resolving issues that people might think they have differences on.
Some people are swanning around here who have been named in the Zondo Commission report, who are still public-facing. It seems the dichotomy, it's not just a contestation of ideas, it seems they're two different camps. Am I right?
Let's say there are two different perspectives. On the latter perspective, where people who are named in the Zondo Commission, I think we have a fairly clear policy. Go proactively to the Integrity Commission, explain whatever you need to explain, and follow through with the recommendations that they make. On the former question, I think we're very mindful of the fact that not only do you need the ANC to survive this period, but we have a huge responsibility, many of us who are in government and those who are passionate about South Africa, who are outside of government, that we want to make South Africa work.
This move coming from the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal, that the step-aside rule actually should be scrapped, it's not working. That's not the point. The only point surely is, how do we show everyone in South Africa we are serious about fighting corruption?
Well, I think we've passed that stage in most of the commissions, as I understand.
Yeah.
And that's not a major issue. We recognize in the vast majority of people here that we don't want to commit political suicide, because that's exactly what it would mean if you give in to those who believe that Zondo Commission doesn't matter, its findings don't matter, and that ultimately public perceptions don't matter. These are all real issues out there, and we need to tackle them. And as you know, in the process of tackling them, those of us that have been advancing that the ANC needs to clean up become the subjects of attacks as well in this process.
The ANC Renewal Commission has been calling for a 40% representation of youth in the NEC. Fasia Hassan spoke to eNCA anchor Masego Ratlaga about why it is important for young people to be at the forefront of the renewal process.
I did hear you guys clap your hands on Friday when the president opened the policy conference. As soon as he mentioned young people, he actually said 50%. If I'm not mistaken.
No, thanks, Masego. 50%, anything above 40. So remember, 40 for us is the minimum. It's not the ceiling. In fact, we want 40% plus. And it's a very important position that we need to put forward, both as the Youth League and as young people in the mass democratic movement. You know, the reality is the majority of the population is under the age of 35. And so our leadership structure should reflect that. In fact, If we were being more statistical, we'd call for 60% of youth representation. But we're in a space where we're really building from something, we're growing, but more importantly, we are really putting our foot down and we're saying we as young people must enter into the leadership structures, but also into the decision-making spaces, not just of the party, but also of the state.
And in terms of how the NEC of the ANC looks right now, what is the percentage, what is the ratio right now?
It's extremely low. The majority of the NEC is probably over the age of 50. I'd have to check for specific statistics, but we're not even talking 40%. We're talking 20% at most. And even that, I don't think there's a single person who's under the age of 35 in the current NEC. And that's why December is so important to us as young people.
And the other issue that was raised even by the DSG, Jessie Duarte, was not only the issue of young people. She raised a lot of issues about race in the ANC. Yes. And the number of females compared to males. And in fact, I remember former President Thabo Mbeki at some point during policy conference this past weekend saying he's looking at this hall and there is not much in terms of race except just mostly black and colored people, and actually mostly black. So even that is another war that I assume you'd be trying to wage against.
So yeah, when we talk non-racism, we talk non-sexism, we're talking about youth representation, all of those are fundamental to the renewal process. But we have to ask ourselves a very deep question, and I say this as an Indian black person in the ANC. Are we attracting different constituencies and communities? And it's extremely difficult. For us, it's also about opening up that space to greater diversity. But on the gender thing, this is a big one. We are calling, yes, for 50-50%, but not just in the additionals. We're calling for 50-50 in the additional, in the office bearers.
Okay.
So when we're talking about women representation, it can't be that men assume the position of chair and secretary, were forced to deputize, number one, but number two, that we'll have one woman in the top 5 and then say, oh, we'll have more women additionals. No, we're rejecting that. We want women at the decision-making table. We want women to be centerfold of how we actually do things in the party. And if we don't change those, and I've said this on public record, if we don't evolve, open up the space to young people, to make it more non-racist, more non-sexist, we are doomed to fail.
Stay tuned to Week in One. Coming up, 4 people have died and infrastructure was damaged when a service delivery protest spiraled out of control in Tembisa this week. Welcome back to Week in One with myself, Ropua Madzena. And continued violent protests rocked Tembisa this week. Police have confirmed that the death of 4 residents during the protests is being investigated by the Independent Police Investigative Directorate. eNCA reporter Pulele Treaty Jones filed this report.
52-year-old Yanda Shabalala has left them with many questions. They say Shabalala was shot inside the family home during violent protests in the area. Now, they want answers. They've opened a case against the police officer who allegedly shot him.
Reboni, what happened? Because this guy was a police traffic officer. Utile straight afitla a shooter this guy, the deceased Alimo Jarteng. So, we've got a trauma, yes, because we can't cope, really.
In terms of Section 49 with the use of force, force which must be used under such gatherings is that which is proportional to the attack being experienced. So in terms of the use of force, cannot really give a comment based because this will again be investigated further by IPID.
The city of Ekurhuleni says the damage caused by residents to the Tembisa Customer Care Centre will cost millions. They also allege the service delivery protest was hijacked by criminal motives.
Well, we are of a view that there's a third hand to this. I mean, even yourself can be able to tell from a distance to say, I mean, bombing of ATMs and torching council vehicles cannot necessarily mean that people are actually complaining about service delivery. We are of a view from a security point of view that this has been hijacked.
Residents say it's either flat rates and stable power supply or the township will continue burning. They've also warned that things could get worse if the Ekurhuleni Mayor, Tanya Campbell, doesn't show up for a meeting as promised. Pulele Treaty Jones, Tembisa in Ekurhuleni.
The National Energy Crisis Committee says it will forego several localization and environmental approvals to end the country's energy crisis. This as the country braces itself for more rolling power cuts. Govan Whittles filed this report.
The localization program requires IPPs to buy certain materials from South African producers. The Trade and Industry Minister says a deviation from this is necessary because the materials aren't available locally.
We've taken the view in government, set out by the President in the address to the nation, that the priority is to get as much electricity, as much energy into the grid as rapidly as possible. That's fundamental. It's important for the economy, it's important for growth, it's important for industrialization and even our localization ambition across the economy. It's important for ordinary South Africans.
The committee says their new plans will achieve energy security for the country by diversifying the sources of power.
Up to 1,000 megawatts is potentially available in the next 3 months, and that will be connected to the grid as well. There's also potential for another 600 megawatts following a similar requirement, and this is where triple exemptions are required from Section 34, from the triple PFA and from the PFMA, and those are processes my colleagues are working on.
And while the attention seems to be on renewables, the Energy Minister says they may still consider a deal with the power ship.
I did a lot of consultation trying to get a legal advice on this matter. And the answer is, anything that is not forbidden is allowed. If it's not forbidden, it is allowed. So, sourcing energy from power ships is not forbidden. If there are technicalities that they must sort out on environmental assessment and many others, they should not comply with that.
The Energy Crisis Committee says the earliest results are expected within a month, but it will take up to 36 months to achieve energy security. Govan Whittles, Pretoria.
Residents of an informal settlement in Jeffreys Bay in the Eastern Cape refuse to be relocated. The community say they've been living in the area for over 2 decades and are relatively close to town. Meanwhile, the Kruger local municipality says they're occupying the land illegally as it belongs to the Public Works Department. eNCA's Nabantlanganiso filed this report.
Sonette Wegnan and her family have been living in Aston Caravan Park for the past 16 years. She says socio-economic issues forced them to live in the area.
I was working up until recently with a friend of mine, Aubrey Russell, as car guards. And Wednesday morning we get told, sorry, you don't have a job. And then, you know, things just, everything goes wrong. COVID happened. Most of us sat 2 years here with no food. We tried to make plans. Some of us got plans, some of us didn't. Yes, that's life on the park.
Gerda Barrows says they are living here comfortably and close as a family, while they are also partially self-sustainable.
Our life is simple here because we have our own gardens. I have a thing going with my wood. I'm making fire. I have a fireplace in my house. We don't have electricity here, but we have solar panels. We're not so far from town. We can still go to town if you need to walk.
These residents asked the United Democratic Movement for help in preventing their eviction.
This is now a democracy. And in the democracy, it's a better life for all. If you come from Sheikh, you must go to the house. They can't just move the people and then throw them in the field. If they want these people to move here and they want to relocate this community, they must give them the keys, or they must give them the plot that they must wait for their own houses.
In 2017, the Eastern Cape Public Works Department took the matter to court. The court ordered that the department and the municipality can only evict the residents if they find a suitable alternative area for them.
The land is owned by the provincial government, Public Works in the province, and they own the land. They have owned it for a long time. The court ruled that we as a municipality need to make land available for them to move to. We have done that. There is land available now where they can move with the necessary services for them to move to.
eNCA tried to reach Eastern Cape Public Works Department for their response, and they were not ready to respond by the time the story had to be published. Nceba Nhlanganiso, Jeffreys Bay, Eastern Cape.
And that brings us to the close of the show this weekend. From myself, Ropwa Madzena, and the rest of the Week in One team, have a great weekend.